Hi there, in this video I'm going to talk to you about anterior pelvic tilt and why it's probably not the cause of any relentless or persistent or disruptive low back pain that you've been experiencing. So my name is Samuel Clark from the Movement Studio and the Spinal Recovery Program, and you know, if you've been told that this is what's causing your back pain, if anterior pelvic tilt is what's causing your back pain, then you need to watch this video right to the end. So, you know, anterior pelvic tilt is traditionally thought to be a big cause of low back pain. And, you know, I have patients and clients tell me on an extremely frequent basis that their chiropractor or their doctor or their physiotherapist or their nurse or their PT or their pet hamster or whatever said they had an anterior pelvic tilt. But what's more, that this anterior pelvic tilt is the main cause of their problems and it needs to be fixed. But here's the thing with this idea, it's really an unhelpful belief, and although it's often spread by well-meaning people, it can really sabotage a person's recovery. And it's one of the many instances in low back pain recovery that we see the emergence of something called the Dunning-Kruger effect. And the Dunning-Kruger effect is more or less when a person has a small or limited slice of knowledge about a very complex subject, in this case, modern day diagnosis and recovery methods for low back pain management. And then based on that small slice of knowledge, they overestimate their understanding of the subject as a whole. And it means really more confusion and frustration and ultimately being in pain for longer and still not being able to, you know, trust your back to do what you need it to do. And you know, the idea of anterior pelvic tilt being a big cause of low back pain is really just something that creates this untrue and really outdated narrative about low back pain recovery. And there's fundamentally three reasons for that. The first is that when you take a whole bunch of people with low back pain and then you take a whole bunch of people with no low back pain and you start measuring their pelvic alignment and their pelvic tilts, a really big portion of those people will measure up to have anterior pelvic tilts. But here's the thing, a lot of those people will be asymptomatic. They'll have no pain, no problems, and they don't necessarily go on to develop problems either. And this means that we see pelvic tilt in both people who have pain and, you know, people who don't have pain. And there's also a significant group of, you know, high-level athletes even who have anterior pelvic tilt, including, you know, the world-class sprinter Usain Bolt. And to really go deeper on this point, the actual measuring techniques that we use to assess anterior pelvic tilt are fundamentally flawed to begin with anyway. You know, we now have technology that can take a 3D picture of your pelvis, and what we see is that the traditional markers that we would use and look for to try and understand if there's an anterior tilt are located in different places for everybody. And what that means is that there's no consistent way to measure postural pelvis tilting, because the bone prominences we measure are no longer reliable indicators of pelvis posture in the first place. So that's the first reason. The second is really just trying to pin one thing on a singular cause of your low back pain and use that to diagnose it. I kind of say it's a bit like trying to sail across an ocean on a boat, but with no navigation system, no engine, no crew. You know, all those things need to be present, and we have to know how and why they relate to each other if you're going to be making that journey. And for over 90% of us, there are multiple things as well that you need to have in place and understand how they relate to each other in order to act on your low back pain and take effective action for it. So pinning all our hopes on just one thing as the short and long-term solution to your persistent back pain is, you know, really not going to go down too well for most people, because again, we're trying to oversimplify something that the overwhelming majority of us won't be relevant for. You know, it's going to require more thought and more expertise than just a superficial understanding of some pelvis tilting, and you know, that really has a tremendously minor influence, to be honest, over your recovery as a whole. And we know that now. Now, the third reason this whole concept of anterior pelvic tilt and its relationship to back pain it doesn't really hold any water now, is that the underpinning initial ideas around it were based on outdated science. And it's since been shown to be completely unfounded. You know, it's really an old, outdated idea that doesn't have any credibility anymore. It was originally made up by people back in the day who just didn't know any better. You know, we didn't have the type of scientific methodology that we have now back then. And for me, that's not really enough of a basis to advise people who are really struggling with life-changing low back pain on. You know, I'm not going to just give them advice that's more or less outdated now and doesn't hold any water in contemporary diagnosis and management of low back pain. And you know, we're lucky enough to work with people all the time who have been told that they've got anterior pelvic tilts. And what we do, and what gets us results, is we get them moving, we show them personalised rehabilitation, we teach them where to direct their focus and truly give them the independence and the control over their body again that they're after. But when they stop moving and they go back to their usual life and start moving in ways that aren't related to their rehabilitation, their pelvis posture will 100% of the time go right back to the original position. And that's not a bad thing, you know, everybody's body has a natural way of working and everybody's body works differently. And putting a large amount of time and energy into changing the angle of someone's pelvis is something that really comes wildly short of the mark in the context of reliable and well-constructed low back pain recovery. So something we see with almost everyone we work with is it's the how and the why behind the movement that helps when it comes to low back pain recovery. It's not some imaginary pelvis positioning. You know, we find that once people with long-term back problems learn to move the pelvis and the low back and the hips in a pain-free way, a way that broadens the amount of movement their body can tolerate, and a way that stimulates their muscles and nerves and ligaments and tendons and their joints in the right way at the right time for their body, it really just sparks the beginning of a journey from a back that can feel fragile and unreliable to one that feels awesome. So do me a favour, do yourself a favour, don't fall into the trap of not seeing the wood through the trees. Arm yourself with the correct knowledge on the whys and the hows behind low back pain recovery. You know, long-term recurrent back pain is a complex beast and it needs to be addressed that way. And what we really need to do is consider the specific needs and demands that your body is under and the lifestyle that you have if we want to recover from it. And you know, I'll be selling your recovery really short if I try to pin all of that on one single factor, and I'll be selling it even shorter if it turns out that factor is completely outdated and irrelevant in the broad scheme of your low back pain recovery, like anterior pelvic tilt turns out to be. So I hope that's useful. My name's Sam Clark again from the Spinal Recovery Program and the Movement Studio, and enjoy the rest of your day.